Most of the atheists, we realize, have become atheists because they believe in science and technology. These people think that science has advanced so much, we don't require any scripture, we don't require any religion, etc.
No, that's not why people become atheists. At least from a skeptical point of view, it's because they fail to see any evidence for the existence of a god or any indication that there's any merit to a religion. Science just happens to be a reasonable means of finding out about the universe that doesn't require making stuff up.
That how did our universe come into existence? So the atheists will tell us that initially there was a primary nebula.
No, there was a singularity.
Then there was a big bang.
More like an expansion.
There was a secondary separation, which gave rise to galaxies, the sun, the moon, and the earth on which we live.
No, there was no secondary separation. Gravity's interactions with matter formed those things.
This we call as a big bang. When did you come to know about this creation of the universe? So he will tell you, about 30-40 years back, the scientists that discovered this. You ask him the question, but what you're talking about the Big Bang is already mentioned in the Qur'an, in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 30, which says, "Avalam yaral lazina kafaru." Do not the unbelievers see anna samawati wal arda kanat ratkan fataqnahuma, that the heavens and the earth were joined together and we clove them asunder.
Not only is that very vague, it's not an accurate representation of the singularity. The Earth formed sometime after what we call the Big Bang, and that's actually talking about a completely different model of the universe. What it's talking about is the separation between the Earth and an infinite cosmic ocean. The ancient Hebrews, and by extensions early Christians and early Muslims, believed that the universe looks something like this. This is the Earth, this is the atmosphere, and this is infinite water. And also, above the water is where God lives. What this verse is talking about is the insertion of the atmosphere between the earth and the water. I'm not making this up.
What you're talking about, the Big Bang, is already mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago. Who could have mentioned that? So the atheist will say, maybe it's a fluke.
Or wrong.
No problem. Don't argue with him. You continue. The light of the moon, is it its own light or reflected light? So the atheist will tell us that previously we thought the moon has its own light. Recently we have come to know in science, recently means 100 years back, 200 years back, we have come to know that the light of the moon is not its own light but a reflected light.
Actually, we figured that out 2,444 years ago with the ancient Greek philosopher Anaxagoras. This was long before Jesus and Muhammad.
The Quran mentions 400 years ago, in Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse number 61, that blessed is he who had placed the constellation in the sky, and placed therein a lamp, a sun, having its own light, and moon having reflected light, or borrowed light. The Arabic word used for moonlight in the Quran is munir or nur, meaning reflected light or borrowed light.
Who could have mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago that the light of the moon is not its own light but reflected light, which we have come to know recently?
Somebody who was decently educated, because we did not come to know this recently.
The atheist may say, your Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, maybe he was an intelligent man. Don't argue with him. Continue. The world that we live on, what's the shape of this earth on which we live? The atheist will tell you, it is spherical. When did we come to know? So he will tell us, it was 1597 when Sir Francis Drake, when he sailed around the earth, that he proved that the earth was spherical.
No, actually we figured this out 6th century BCE in, well, early Greece. But the first evidences given for it was from 4th century BCE with Aristotle. Again, this is far before both Jesus and Muhammad.
But the Quran says 1400 years ago, in Surah Naziyat, chapter number 79, verse number 30, Wal arda ba'da zalika dahaha. And thereafter, we have made the earth egg-shaped. The Arabic word dahaha, one of its meaning is the earth is an expanse. The other meaning is derived from the Arabic word duya, which means an egg.
The earth is not shaped like an egg.
And it doesn't refer to a normal egg. It refers to the egg of an ostrich. And we know the world is not completely round like a ball, but it is geospherical in shape. It is starting from the pole. And if you analyze the shape of the egg of an ostrich, that too is geospherical in shape.
An ostrich egg is still not shaped like a sphere, or the earth for that matter. To quote the Wikipedia article Figure of the Earth deviates from a perfect sphere only by 1/3%, sufficiently close to treat it as a sphere in many contexts and justify the term the radius of the Earth. So it's pretty much a sphere, and certainly not the shape of an egg.
Who could have mentioned 1400 years ago that the shape of the earth is geospherical?
A decently educated man, because that was already established before the Quran was written.
Again, the atheist may say, your prophet, maybe he's super intelligent. Don't argue with him. You can continue. When I was in school, I had learned that the sun was stationary. It revolved, but did not rotate about its own axis.
What? How can it be stationary and revolve? Those two things are directly contradictory to each other, and it actually does rotate.
So the atheists will say, is that mentioned in the Quran? I say, no, that is what I learned in school. I had learned the sun was stationary, did not rotate about its own axis. But the Quran says in Surah Anbiya, chapter number 21, verse number 33, Huwa allazi khalaqa al-layl wa nahara. It is Allah who has created the night and the day. Wa shamsa wal qamar, the sun and the moon. Kullun fi falaki yasbahun, each one traveling in orbit with its own motion.
But science tells us that while the moon goes around the earth goes around the sun. The earth is just rotating, and that's why we perceive it moving.
So the Quran says that besides the sun revolving, it even rotates about its own axis.
It says it revolves around its own axis, which actually isn't true.
Who could have mentioned this in the Quran 1400 years ago?
Somebody who doesn't understand that our solar system is heliocentric, like the ancient Hebrews?
And the atheists will be silent.
Well, not me. And even if they are silent, they probably just don't understand what you said, mostly because you confused rotation with revolution.
There'll be a long pause. Don't wait for the reply. You can keep on continuing. Today, science tells us that the universe is expanding, which is mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago in Surah Dhariyat, chapter number 51, verse number 47.
He's not going to read this one, so I get to pull out my Quran and read it for you. The verse says, "With power and skill did we construct the firmament, for it is we who create the vastness of space." In no way is that stating that the universe is expanding. It's just saying that they created space. But I want to call attention to this word firmament. Remember this model of the universe? The firmament is essentially what separates our atmosphere from the cosmic ocean. That's the only thing that the word firmament means. And again, this is completely inaccurate as to what we know about the universe today.
The Quran speaks about the water cycle which we learnt in school. It was Sir Bernard Palissy in 1580 who first described the water cycle, how does the water evaporate from the ocean, forms into clouds, moves into the interior, fall down as rain.
Actually, we've known about the water cycle since around 500 BCE. And, get this, in ancient Greece.
This water cycle is spoken about in great detail in the Quran in several verses.
Here we go.
In Surah Az-Zumur, chapter 39, verse 21.
He doesn't read this one either, so allow me. "Seest thou not that Allah sends down rain from the sky, and leads it through springs in the earth? Then he causes to grow therewith produce of various colors. When it withers, thou wilt see it grow yellow. Then he makes it dry up and crumble away. Truly, in this is the message of remembrance to men of understanding." That's just saying that rain falls down from the sky and plants get the water from the rain. This doesn't require scientific knowledge, this requires at least one eye.
In Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse 24.
"And among his signs, he shows you lightning by way of both fear and of hope. And he sends down rain from the sky, and with it gives life to the earth after it is dead. Verily in that are signs for those who are wise." Again, this just requires at least one eye to figure out. And there's no mention of evaporation.
In Surah Hijr, chapter 15, verse 22.
"And we send the fecundating winds that cause the rain to descend from the sky, therewith providing you with water in abundance, although ye are not the guardians of its stores." Again, it's just saying that it rains. This isn't scientifically advanced.
In Surah Mu'minun, chapter number 23, verse number 18.
"And we send down water from the sky according to due measure, and we cause it to soak into the soil, and we certainly are able to drain it off with ease. So water falls from the sky and goes into the ground." We've known this long before Muhammad.
In Surah Nur, chapter number 24, verse number 43. In Surah Rum, chapter number 30, verse 48.
Again, those are just basic observations, not something scientifically advanced.
In Surah Araf, chapter number 7, verse number 17.
Now this one's interesting. It says, "Then I will assault them from before and behind them, from their right and their left. Nor wilt thou find, in most of them, gratitude for thy mercies." Because water cycle.
In Surah Furqan, chapter number 25, verse 48 to 49. In Surah Fatir, chapter number 35, verse number 9. In Surah Yasin, chapter number 36, verse number 34. In Surah Mulk, chapter number 67, verse number 30. In Surah Tariq, chapter number 86, verse number 11.
And all of that may seem impressive, but all of those verses are saying is that it rains. It gives no mention of evaporation, and it states that clouds are formed when God sends wind, and as such it treats rain as a miracle. But again, we have long had evaporation as an explanation.
There are hundreds of verses in the Quran which only speak about the water cycle which science has discovered recently.
Again, it was talked about in ancient Greece, and apparently your Quran gets it wrong. And within those alleged 100 verses in the Quran that deal with the water cycle, you couldn't have picked one that deals with evaporation, and not just things that we can see with our eyes?
We can keep on talking that today we have come to know that the plants have got sexes which we did not know earlier. Quran says in Surah Taha, chapter number 20, verse number 53, that the plants have got sexes, male and female.
That verse in the Quran isn't exactly very clear on the matter, but we've known about this since, get this, ancient Greece, as early as the works of Theophrastus.
Today, we have come to know that there are two types of water, sweet and salty.
What? There's only one type of water, dihydrogen monoxide.
And there's a barrier between them.
What? Are you talking about this? Because I don't think the Quran talks about this.
Which is mentioned in the Quran in Surah Furqan, chapter 25, verse 53.
That verse is actually probably a metaphor between believers and non-believers, and the verse states that both of them are forbidden to pass between the barrier. And this does actually mix, just as if you were to mix salt water and sugar water.
And Surah Rahman, chapter 55, verse 17 and 18.
Which has nothing to do with what you're talking about.
Today science tells us that it is the mountains which prevent the earth from shaking.
What are you talking about? Science doesn't say that at all. In fact, the same mechanism that causes mountains causes earthquakes.
Which is mentioned in the Quran 1400 years ago in Surah Naba, chapter number 78, verse number 6 and 7.
Have we not made the earth as a wide expanse, and the mountains as pegs? Mountains are not pegs.
The Quran speaks about biology, that we have created every living creature from water. Every living thing. In Surah Anbiya, chapter 21, verse number 30, Quran mentions this 1400 years ago.
That verse just says living things were made out of water. Well, what about the carbon? Where did that come from? Even if it was correct, it's not saying much of anything because this sounds like something that could easily be made up.
The Quran speaks about zoology, about the lifestyle of the spider in Surah Ankabut, chapter 29, verse 41.
The parable of those who take protectors other than Allah is that of the spider, who builds to itself a house. But truly the flimsiest of houses is the spider's house, if they but knew. That's basically just saying that a spider web is easy to break. That's not exactly scientifically advanced.
About the ant in Surah Namal, chapter 27, verse 17 to 18.
Which again isn't scientifically advanced, and it actually talks about a talking ant. That's right, ants that speak.
About the bee in Surah Nahl, chapter number 16, verse 66, 68, 69.
Which again isn't scientifically advanced, and bees were talked about in ancient Greece.
The Quran speaks about embryology in Surah Alaq, chapter 96, verse number 1 and 2. We have created the human being from alaqa, a leech-like substance, which we have come to know recently.
From what I could find, it seems more like it's saying that God created mankind from congealed blood, which doesn't exactly make sense.
The Quran speaks about embryological stages in Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, verse number 12 to 14.
Well, what it says there isn't exactly advanced. It says that sperm goes into a clot of congealed blood, and that then forms bones and then skin. Not only is that wrong in a couple ways, but it's not that hard to think about it without much scientific evidence. After all, you go from a woman who doesn't have a child to a woman who does have a child inside of her. So it makes sense that the child grows from inside, even if you don't really exactly know how.
You can go on talking about the scientific points. There are more than 1,000 verses in the Quran which speak about science. After every scientific fact, you ask the question, who could have mentioned that in the Quran?
Since everything you've shown here was known before Muhammad, somebody who was decently educated,